Left to die in a blizzard, she was too old to love, too tough to break. What hidden strength will pull her from the snow? Snow doesn't give a damn about your heart, your years, or your hopes. Julia Mayfield learned that the hard way at 55, when her boots shattered the icy crust and sank deep into the freezing white abyss. The wind screamed like a wounded beast, tearing her shawl from her shoulders and slashing its skin already red and raw from days of trudging west. Her gloves, once sturdy wool from her mother's hands, were now threadbare scraps, clinging to her trembling fingers like damp, useless cloth. Every breath she dragged and cut like a blade, sharp and dry, rattling her ribs as if they'd crack under the strain. Barely 2 hours ago, the town of Dry Creek had spit her out like a bad taste. They didn't even let her finish the tea she'd cradled in her palms, hoping it'd warm her bones. Sam Walker stood on his sagging porch, tall and smug, his breath a fog of whiskey and arrogance, her suitcase still unopened at her feet. He'd taken one lazy glance, her graying hair, her lined face, and flicked his hand like she was smoke in his eyes. Too old, he'd sneered, voice dripping with contempt. You'll be dead before spring thaws the ground. His friends barked laughter, harsh and hollow. His brothers snorted, spitting dark wads of tobacco into the snow. Even the preacher, clutching a worn Bible like a prop, turned his face away, muttering about God's will as if that washed his hands clean. She didn't cry, not when they heaved her trunk into the drifts like it was garbage, not when Sam's daughter, a sharp-tongued girl of 20 with eyes like knives, spat near her boots and hissed, dusty old crow. Not even when the stagecoach driver shrugged, cracked his reins, and said, "Ain't my job to haul you back, ma'am," before rumbling off into the fading light. But now, with the storm flaying her alive, her resolve started to unravel like the tattered hem of her dress, stitched and restitched too many times. Each step away from town sank heavier, her legs buckling under the weight of nothing. No map, no money, no place to turn. She'd sold everything back east, chasing a mail-order promise from Sam, a last shot at home, and it had slammed the door in her face with a drunken laugh. Her knees gave out, and she crumpled into the snow, flakes catching on her lashes, blurring the endless white into a soft, deadly haze. 2 miles back, her suitcase had split apart, its cheap clasp snapping under the cold. A Bible her mother pressed in her hands at 16, a faded photo of Henry, her husband lost to consumption 3 years past, a jar of plum jam she'd made for children she'd never hold, all scattered and buried in the drifts. She shut her eyes, and Henry's face rose up, gentle and round, his eyes crinkling as he smiled through the fever. Still shining, "Julia," he'd whisper when the sickness ate him hollow. She wanted to say yes, to stand and fight the cold, to prove she still had light left, but the wind roared harder, and her fingers went numb, curling into useless fists. She wasn't shining. She was fading, a candle drowning in its own wax. Still, a flicker of something, stubbornness, maybe pushed her forward. She crawled, clawing through the snow, her breath hitching in ragged gasps. The wind howled louder, a banshee clawing at her ears. Her hands felt like brittle sticks, her feet like stones dragging uselessly behind. The road was gone, swallowed by drifts and the skeletal remains of trees, their branches clawing at the sky like desperate hands. Then, through the swirling white, a shape loomed, a shadow, maybe a shack, tilting in the distance like a cruel trick of her mind. Was it real? A shelter, or just her hope breaking apart? She dragged herself toward it, nails scraping ice, knees bleeding through her skirt, her body a shivering wreck. Dignity was a memory now. Survival was all that mattered. She reached a crooked wooden door, its edges weathered and splintered, gray as the storm itself. She slumped against it, too weak to knock, too cold to feel her own heartbeat. Her vision blurred, then blackened, and the world slipped away like water through her fingers. A voice punched through the dark, rough, low, not unkind. "You still alive, lady?" Her throat was frozen, words locked inside. "Damn fool thing to be out here alone," the voice growled again. Strong hands gripped her arms, real and warm, hauling her up with a grunt of effort. A door creaked open, hinges whining under strain. Boots thudded on warped wood. Heat brushed her face, faint at first, then sharp, alive with the smell of pine smoke and dust. The man dropped her onto something soft, maybe a cot, her head lolling like a broken doll's. Her eyes fluttered, blurry and weak, as he yanked off her soaked gloves, cursing low under his breath, then peeled off her boots, wrapping her ice-block feet in a coarse blanket that scratched like burlap. Water hissed somewhere, a kettle on a stove, a cup pressed to her lips, hard and insistent. "Drink," he said. She choked down a sip, bitter, scalding, maybe tea, maybe something stronger. It burned her throat raw, and then the darkness swallowed her again, pulling her under like a tide. She woke to the snap of a fire in a small stone hearth, its glow flickering across rough, uneven walls. The cabin was tiny, cramped, one room with a sagging cot, a rocking chair patched with twine, a table that looked like it had been kicked one too many times. A man stood by the window, rifle slung over his shoulder, staring at her like she was a stray dog he wasn't sure he'd keep. "Name's Jed Thompson," he said finally, voice flat and hard as the frozen ground outside. "Found you face down in the snow, not 10 steps from my woodshed." She sat up slow, her head spinning like a drunkard's, every muscle screaming. "Thank you," she rasped, her voice a cracked whisper. He nodded once, sharp and quick. "What hell were you doing out there? Ain't fit for a jackrabbit, let alone a woman alone." She swallowed, wincing at the ache in her throat. "I was dismissed." He snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "You a teacher or something fancy?" She shook her head, slow. "Mail order bride." His eyebrows shot up, surprise cracking his stony face. "You don't say. Who was dumb enough to order you?" "Sam Walker." Jed's mouth twisted into a grimace, like he'd bitten something rotten. "Sam's a damn jackass. Should have been tossed in a well and left there years ago." She almost smiled, almost just a twitch at the corner of her lips. "He said I was too old." Jed huffed, jabbing a poker into the fire. "He's right about one thing." Her chest tightened, a sudden stab of hurt. "Which one?" "He's a jackass." A laugh slipped out of her, small and sharp, catching them both off guard. "I don't got much," he said, turning back to the flames, his voice gruff again. "Cabin leaks like a sieve. Kids are loud as hell. Work's backbreaking. Stay a night, maybe 2. After that, we'll see what's what." She nodded, grateful. "Thank you." Silence fell between them, thick but not uneasy. She watched the fire twist and dance, shadows leaping across the walls. He watched the door, like he expected it to burst open any second. A coyote wailed in the distance, its cries swallowed by the wind's low moan. "I didn't plan to come back from this," she whispered, more to herself than him. He didn't turn. "Thought maybe the snow would take me quiet. No fuss, no fight." He poked the fire harder, sparks flying. "Could have let it. Why didn't you?" "Didn't feel right." She studied him then. Lean frame under a patched coat, shoulders broad from labor. Eyes like river stones, gray and cold but not cruel. "There's still good men out there," she said, voice soft. "I ain't one," he muttered, barely audible. "I've known worse." Another silence stretched out, broken only by the fire's hiss and the wind's restless tapping at the walls. "What's your name?" he asked finally, glancing her way. "Julia Mayfield." He nodded once, slow and thoughtful, like he was filing it away. Outside, the storm pressed against the cabin, but inside, the warmth held its ground. "You hungry?" he asked suddenly, moving to a shelf in the corner. She blinked, stomach growling at the thought. "Yes, starving." He handed her a tin of beans, still warm from the stove, the metal dented but solid. "Ain't no roast chicken, but it'll keep you upright." She took it, her hands thawing against the heat. They ate without words, just the scrape of spoons on tin and the fire's steady crackle. Later, as she lay on the cot, staring at the wooden beams crisscrossing the ceiling, she whispered to the dark, "Maybe there's still something left for me out here." Jed didn't answer, but he didn't leave the room either, his silhouette a quiet anchor in the shadows, and that felt like a lifeline she hadn't expected. Morning crept in, pale and frosty, the light filtering through a window crusted with ice. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint pop of embers in the hearth. Julia woke stiff and sore, every joint creaking like an old gate, but alive, a small victory she clung to. Outside, a shovel scraped against frozen earth, a steady, stubborn sound. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and shuffled to the window. Jed hacked at the ice, breath puffing in white clouds, moving with the rhythm of a man who'd learned to rely on no one but himself. The door banged open, and he stomped snow off his boots, his eyes flicking to her, then back to the stove. "You look better," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Feel worse," she replied, rubbing her aching hands. He grunted, tossing a handful of kindling into the fire. "You'll live." She watched him closer, broad shoulders hunched against the cold, sunburned neck peeking from his collar, beard streaked with gray like frost on a pine. Not old, not young, just shaped by years of hard living. "Do you live out here alone?" she asked, settling back on the cot. "Me, the kids, a mule too damn stubborn to die." "Kids?" She glanced around the dim, cluttered room. "Still sleeping. They're slow risers." She nodded, picturing a lone father raising little ones in this wild, unforgiving corner of the world. "Your wife?" she asked, softer now, testing the waters. "Dead. Fever took her last spring. Buried her under the aspen out back, where she liked to sit." His voice was flat, but his hand paused on the stove, just for a second. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. He didn't answer, just stirred a pot of something bubbling on the fire, slow and deliberate, like he was stirring memories he didn't want to face. "I'll work for my keep," she said, sitting up straighter. "I don't take charity." He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. "Work, huh? What can you do?" "Cook, mend, wash, chop wood if you've got a dull axe and some time to spare." He let out a short laugh, almost unwilling, like it surprised him. "Patience ain't optional out here." "Then I'm already ahead of the game," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. A creak echoed from the back of the cabin, soft at first, then louder. Two small figures shuffled into the room. One a girl, tall for her age, with sharp brown eyes and a braid unraveling down her back. The other a boy, barely out of toddling, clutching a wooden horse carved with clumsy care. "Sarah, Liam," Jed said, nodding at them like they were soldiers reporting in. "This is Miss Mayfield. She's staying a bit." They stared, silent and wary, sizing her up. Julia knelt slow, her knees protesting, so she wouldn't scare them off. "Good morning," she said gently. "Your dad was kind enough to fish me out of the snow." Sarah tilted her head, unimpressed, her gaze cutting like a blade. "You look like a ghost." Liam blinked up at her, big eyes shining with curiosity. "Are you?" She smiled, faint but real, a warmth she hadn't felt in months. "Not yet, sweetheart, though I gave a fair shot out there." Jed cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Eat you too." Now, they shuffled to the table, and Julia joined them, settling on a wobbly stool. The stew was thin, mostly potatoes and a few stringy carrots, but warm, spiced with something that hinted at care, maybe time from a forgotten garden. Sarah watched her like she might vanish into thin air. Liam poked at his bowl, sneaking glances, his wooden horse perched beside him like a guard. After, Julia gathered the bowls and started washing them in a dented tin basin, the water cold against her hands. Jed leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her work. "You don't have to do that," he said, voice gruff. "I know," she replied, scrubbing his stubborn spot. That's why it matters. He didn't argue, just turned back to the fire, adding a log with a practice toss. The day moves slow and steady, like a river carving its way through stone. Jed pulled on his coat and headed out to check traps and mend a fence the wind had battered overnight, his footsteps crunching in the snow. Julia stayed inside with the kids, the cabin's walls creaking under the weight of silence. Sarah perched by the window, carving notches into a stick with a small knife, her movements quick and sure, like she'd done it 100 times. Liam wandered the room, dragging his wooden horse across the floor, muttering little stories about brave riders and secret caves. Julia picked up a torn curtain from a pile of mending, threading a needle with steady hands, humming a tune from her old life back east, a hymn Henry used to whistle when he shaved. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It was softening, easing into something almost comfortable. In the afternoon, she knelt beside Sarah, a bowl of cornmeal between them. "Want to learn something?" she asked. Sarah shrugged, but her eyes flicked with interest. Julia showed her how to make cornbread, mixing the dough with her hands, testing the heat with a drop of batter that sizzled on the stove. Sarah didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed, and she leaned closer, watching every move. Liam toddled over, tugging at Julia's skirt, and pressed a pine cone in her palm. "It's magic," he said, serious as a preacher. "Keeps you from freezing." "Is it now?" She tucked it into her apron pocket, giving him a solemn nod. "Then I owe you my life, little man." He grinned, gap-toothed, and scampered off to tell his horse the news. By sunset, Jed trudged back, snow dusting his coat, a pair of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He stopped in the doorway, blinking at the scene. Liam perched on Julia's lap, chattering about a bandit he'd fought in his imagination, Sarah hovering close with flowers smudged on her cheek, the smell of cornbread lingering in the air. "Didn't expect you to stay inside all day," he said, voice gruff but softer around the edges. "Didn't expect to live through yesterday," she shot back, brushing flour from her hands. He grunted, but there was less bite to it, almost a smile tugging at his mouth. That night, after the kids were tucked into their narrow bed in the corner, he stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the stars pricking the black sky. Julia sat in the rocking chair, stitching a patch onto a torn shirt by the flickering light of a candle. "You got family?" he asked, voice low, barely breaking the quiet. "No," she said, needle pausing mid-stitch. "Henry, my husband, passed 3 years ago. Consumption took him slow. No kids. I was a seamstress back east till folks decided I was too old to bother with." He nodded, slow and deliberate, like he was turning her words over in his mind. "World's hard on women with years on him. Hard on everyone," she said, threading the needle again. "Women just get blamed for the storms they didn't call." He chuckled, a rough, reluctant sound. "Ain't that the damn truth?" A log snapped in the fire, spitting sparks that flared and died. "I wasn't planning to stay," she said softly, eyes on her work. "This was supposed to be my last stop, a last chance at something." "Didn't ask you to stay," he said, still facing the window. She looked up at him, his silhouette sharp against the glass. "But you didn't let me freeze out there either." He rubbed the back of his neck, shifting his weight. "That was just decency. Decency's rarer than gold these days." He turned then, meeting her gaze, shadows carving lines across his face. "I ain't looking for a replacement for her," he said, voice low and firm. "And I ain't looking to be one for him," she replied, steady as stone. They held the moment between them, fragile but solid, like a bridge built on trust instead of promises. He nodded once, sharp, and turned back to the window. "Rest," he said. "You'll need your strength." She blew out the candle, the room sinking into dark. In the night, tiny footsteps padded across the floor. Liam climbed onto her cot, curling in her side, his small hand wrapping around hers like it belonged there. She didn't push him away, just let him stay, his breathing a soft rhythm against the quiet. Next morning came with a pale gold light seeping through the frost-laced window, the air sharp and still. Julia rose early, stoked the fire with a few sticks, and started breakfast, cornbread from yesterday, and a thin broth simmered from rabbit bones. The smell filled the cabin, warm and simple. Jed shuffled in from the back, pausing at the sight of her bustling around the stove, a pot steaming in her hands. "You make a habit of taking over strangers' kitchens?" he asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his voice rough with mourning. "Only when they're doing a piss-poor job of it," she said, pouring him a cup of coffee, black and bitter. He took a sip, raised an eyebrow. "Better than mine." "Of course it is," she said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. He almost smiled, almost his mouth twitching before he hid it behind the cup. They ate in quiet, the kids chewing slow, still half lost in sleep. Sarah watched Julia over her spoon, her sharp eyes softer now, less wary. Liam kicked his legs under the table, his horse galloping across the wood between bites. Then a knock rattled the door. Sharp, fast, urgent as a heartbeat. Jed grabbed his rifle, motioning for her to stay back. He cracked the door open, peering out. A man in a dusted coat stood there, breath fogging in the cold, his face hard and lined. "Trouble," he said low, glancing past Jed into the cabin. "Bandits spotted up by the ridge. 5, maybe 6, armed to the teeth. Folks say they're headed south, cutting through here." Jed swore under his breath, gripping the rifle tighter. "How long we got?" "No one knows for sure. Could be days, could be tonight. Keep that gun close, you've got kids." The man tipped his hat and turned away, boots crunching as he disappeared into the trees. Jed locked the door, his jaw tight, eyes dark. Julia set her spoon down, her stomach twisting. "Should I be worried?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the door like he could see through it, then shifted his gaze to the fire. "Maybe," he said finally, voice low. Sarah went still, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. Liam kept eating, oblivious, humming to his horse. "Teach me to shoot," Julia said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. He turned slow, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You ever handled a rifle?" "No, but I'll learn fast." He studied her, long and hard, like he was weighing her soul. "After chores," he said at last, setting the rifle down with a thud. They went out to a clearing behind the cabin after the dishes were done, the air biting and crisp, the ground crunching underfoot. He handed her the rifle, cold, heavy, its iron weight sinking in her palms like a promise of consequence. "Don't aim unless you're ready to kill," he said, voice even and unyielding. "This ain't a game, and there's no second shot if you hesitate." "I won't hesitate," she said, squaring her shoulders, her chin lifting. He showed her how, brace it against her shoulder till it bit into the bone, sight down the barrel till the world narrowed to a pinpoint, breathe slow and steady, pull the trigger smooth as a whisper. Her first shot went wide, kicking up snow and sending a bird flapping from a branch with an angry caw. The second grazed a log, splintering bark. The third sank deep, a clean hole in the wood. "Not bad," he muttered, crossing his arms. "Could be cleaner." "I'm not here for trophies, Jed," she said, wiping sweat from her brow despite the cold. "No," he said, meeting her eyes. "You're here to survive." They practiced till dusk, her arms aching, her fingers numb from gripping the cold metal. He was a hard teacher, sharp words when she flinched, a firm hand when her stance wavered. But he didn't mock her, didn't let her give up. The sun dipped low, painting the snow in streaks of gold and violet, and he nodded, satisfied. "That's enough for today." She handed the rifle back, her breath puffing white in the fading light. Her body hurt. Every muscle screamed, but something inside her burned brighter, fiercer, like a coal that wouldn't die. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin walls like a restless spirit. Julia sat by the fire, Sarah curled beside her on the cot, a half-knitted scarf of rough wool spilling across her lap. Jed cleaned his rifle across the room, silent and methodical, the click of metal a steady heartbeat in the quiet. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" Sarah asked, her voice small, her sharp eyes searching Julia's face. Jed didn't look up from his work. "Maybe," he said low and clipped. Julia reached for the girl's hand, squeezing it tight. "If they do, they'll find a fight waiting." Sarah studied her, her brow furrowing. "You're not scared?" "I'm scared every damn minute," Julia said, her voice soft but steady. "But that don't mean I'll run." The fire crackled louder for a moment, spitting sparks up the chimney like a warning. Jed stood, stretching his back with a groan, and moved to the window, peering into the swirling dark. "Lantern," he said, holding out a hand. She passed it to him without a word, the glass warm from the flame inside. He stepped outside, just long enough to hang on a hook by the door, its weak light flickering in the blowing snow. A signal, a challenge. Someone's home. Someone's ready. They took shifts watching. Julia went first, sitting by the window with the rifle across her lap, ears straining for anything beyond the wind's low moan. A snap, a step, a whisper of danger. She thought of her old life back east, tea in chipped cups, mending by lamplight, polite chatter about curtains and church suppers. It felt like a ghost story now, belonging to someone she didn't recognize. Jed took the second watch, his boots creaking soft across the floor. She barely slept, half listening to his steady pacing, not from fear but from a readiness that had settled into her bones like marrow. The attack came just before dawn, a gray light bleeding into the sky. A footstep crunched where none should be, too close, too deliberate. Then another, would groan under weight, a shadow, shifting outside. Jed was up in an instant, rifle in hand, shoving her down with a hiss, "Stay low." Glass shattered. Liam screamed, high and piercing. Sarah bolted upright, eyes wide. Julia moved without thinking, pulling the kids to the corner behind the cot, her heart hammering but her hands steady. Gunfire cracked outside, loud and cruel, splitting the air. Shadows darted beyond the lantern's weak glow, fast and jagged. 4, maybe 5, Jed shouted, flipping the table for cover and firing back, his teeth gritted, eyes sharp with fury. The door shuddered. Someone slammed against it, wood creaking under the force. Julia took position by the broken window, rifle braced, her pulse pounding in her ears. She sighted down the barrel, waiting for a clear shot. A figure lunged into view, wild hair, glinting steel. She fired. A cry ripped through the dark, and a body dropped into the snow, red blooming fast. Jed glanced over, quick and sharp. "Nice. Don't get soft now." Another man burst through the door, eyes wild, stinking of whiskey and sweat. She shot his shoulder. He spun back with a howl. Jed finished him with a single, clean shot, the crack echoing in the small space. Smoke choked the air, thick and bitter. The kids whimpered behind the overturned chairs, their breaths fast and shallow. One more bandit charged in, knife flashing in the firelight. Jed ducked, tackle him hard. They crashed into the table, grunting, thrashing, wood splintering under their weight. Julia Bish moved fast, grabbed a skillet from the stove, still hot, and brought it down hard across the man's head. A dull thunk, and he went limp, sprawling across the floor. "Hell of a swing," Jed panted, staggering to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his brow. Outside, footsteps retreated, 2 men running for the woods, their curses fading into the wind. Jed staggered to the door, fired one last shot into the dark, then stopped, chest heaving as dawn broke through the clouds, pale and cold. She sank to the floor, her legs giving out like wet rope. Liam ran to her, sobbing in her skirt, his small hands clutching tight. She wrapped him up, rocking him slow, murmuring nonsense. "It's okay, you're safe, I've got you," to keep her own tears from spilling. Sarah crept over, pale but steady, her sharp eyes locked on Julia. They're gone, she whispered. For now, Jed said, wiping blood from his face with his sleeve. They've buried the bodies that morning. 2 in the snow outside. 1 sprawled inside the broken door, silent, grim work under a sky heavy with gray. Julia dug with numb hands, her dress stained with dirt and blood, her sleeves rolled up despite the cold. Jed didn't stop her, just worked beside her, his shovel biting into the frozen earth. They piled stones over the graves, no markers, no words, just distance from the cabin. Back inside, she scrubbed the floor till her knuckles bled, erasing the red that had pooled under the bandit's body. Sarah stayed close, fetching water in a dented bucket, patching the curtains with small, careful stitches, her hands trembling just a little. Liam clung to his horse, quieter than usual, his eyes big and haunted. By evening, the cabin was patched together, boards over the broken window, blood gone from the floor, the worst of the wreckage cleared. They ate in silence, a thin stew of roots and rabbit, the fire too small to chase out the chill that lingered in the air. Jed pulled a bottle of cheap whiskey from a hidden shelf under the cot, poured 2 tin cups, and handed her one. She took it with a quiet nod, the burn of it steadying her shaking hands. You held your own out there, he said, voice low, his eyes on the fire. Had something to lose, she replied, sipping slow. He sat heavy in the chair across from her, the weight of the night settling into his bones. They'll come back, or others will. That's the world out here, never stops coming for you. I know, she said, meeting his gaze. So let's not face it alone. He blinked, caught off guard. You mean, marry me, Jed, she said, steady as the earth under her feet. Not for love, not yet, but for them, for this roof, for staying alive. He stared into the fire, long and hard, the flames reflecting in his gray eyes. I ain't much of a prize, he said at last, voice rough. Neither am I, she shot back. But I've got 2 strong hands and no intention of dying anytime soon. He took a slow drink, rolling the whiskey around his mouth like he was tasting her words. I've seen men fall in love for worse reasons, he said finally. Then let's give him better ones, she replied. He nodded once, a small, quiet motion, and in that gesture a life began, scarred, shaky, but real. Weeks passed, the snow softening in thin, reluctant patches along the ridge, the air turning sharp with the promise of spring. Then a letter came, folded twice, sealed with a smudge of wax, carried from town in Jed's coat like something half sacred, half cursed. He dropped it on the table between them without a word, his face a mask she couldn't read. Julia Mayfield. It read in tight, practical script, the ink smudged at the edges. She picked it up, her heart stalling for a beat, and broke the seal with steady fingers. One paragraph, short and cold. Sam Walker was dead, shot through the chest in a card game gone sour. No heirs, no kin, no one to claim his small patch of land near Dry Creek. As his once intended bride, it was hers if she came to sign the papers. She folded it slow, her hands unshaking, her expression blank as the snow outside. I thought I'd never have to see that place again, she said that night, the fire burning low, the kids asleep in the corner. Jed sat beside her on the cot, his shoulder brushing hers. You don't, he said, voice low. But if I don't, that land will get swallowed up. Some bastard like the ones who watch me get tossed out will take it, and I'll have nothing to show for all this. He nodded slow. Then I'll come with you. A few days later, they hitched the wagon. Kids bundled in blankets, supplies rattling in the back, the mule snorting at the cold. Liam rode in the back, playing with his horse, humming a tune about brave knights. Sarah sat beside Julia on the bench, sharp-eyed and silent, her braid tucked tight under a scarf patched with Julia's stitching. The mountains watched them pass, vast and silent, old as grief. Dry Creek hadn't changed. 3 crooked streets scarred into the dirt, a saloon leaking noise and smoke, a general store with a sagging roof, a courthouse leaning left like it was tired of holding up justice. They rolled in just after noon, and folks on the saloon porch paused their drinks to stare, their eyes hard and curious. One man spat tobacco into the dust, muttering which loud enough to carry. Julia smiled, thin and cold, her chin high. Inside the courthouse, a clerk with thinning hair and ink-stained cuffs slid a stack of papers across the desk, his fingers twitching. She signed them without ceremony, her name flowing smooth across the page. Julia Mayfield, steady as ever. "Didn't expect you back," he said, peering over his spectacles. "I never really left," she replied, sliding the papers back. "Just changed direction." As they stepped outside, a familiar voice called her name. "Miss Mayfield." She turned. The preacher hurried across the street, same drab coat, same half-hearted expression, his hat clutched to his chest like a shield. I heard you'd returned," he stammered. "Wanted to apologize for that day." "You mean the day you stood there while they threw me out like a stray mud in a snowstorm?" she said, her voice calm but cutting. He winced, his face crumpling. "I should have said something. Should have stepped in. You didn't." "I regret it," he said, eyes darting away. "Regret's cheap," she shot back. "Action costs more." He shifted, uncomfortable. "I see you've settled with Mr. Thompson now." She glanced at Jed, leaning against the wagon, hand resting casual on his rifle, eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. "Yes," she said, "a father, a husband in all but name, steady as the ground under his boots." The preacher tried to smile. It fell flat. She turned and walked away, her steps lighter than they'd been in years. They reached Sam's land by dusk, dry and wind-scoured, but the soil was dark, promising life if you worked it right. A few wild horses grazed in the distance, their manes whipping in the breeze. His shack stood half-rotted, leaning like a drunk, but it was shelter of kind. Sarah helped unload supplies, her movements quick and sure. Liam rolled in the dirt, singing a made-up song about hero mothers and brave fathers, his horse galloping through imaginary fields. That night, they camped beside the shack, a small fire crackling under the stars. Julia stood at the edge of the land, the sun bleeding red behind the hills, the wind tugging at her coat like an old friend. Coyotes howled, their cries threading through the dark. Jed stepped beside her, his shadow long and quiet. "You thinking of staying here?" he asked, voice low. "No," she said, eyes on the horizon. "Just remembering what it felt like to be left here, powerless, small, nothing." "You don't look small now," he said, a faint grin tugging at his mouth. She gave him a sidelong glance. "Flatter." He chuckled, soft and rare. They turned in early, kids curled together in the blankets, Jed sitting with his back against the shack wall, rifle across his knees. Julia lay beside him, not quite asleep, not quite alert, her hand resting near his. The attack came fast, just past midnight. 3 riders bursting from the dark, no warning, guns drawn. "That land's ours," one shouted, voice raw with greed. "You think you could just waltz in and take it?" Bullets bit into the shack's rotted walls, splintering wood. Jed was on his feet, returning fire, his shot steady and sharp. Julia grabbed her rifle from beside the blankets, rolled behind a barrel, her heart pounding, but her hands calm. Sarah shoved Liam beneath a broken table, her small body shielding his, then gripped Julia's hand tight, her eyes fierce. One rider circled wide, trying to flank them, his horse snorting in the dark. Julia tracked him through the gaps in the shack, breathe, aim, squeeze. The shot caught him square in the chest, sending him spinning off the saddle into the dirt, a dark stain spreading fast. Another fired back, splinters flew, grazing her cheek. She ducked, reloaded with trembling fingers. Jed cursed, fired twice more. One man fell, his gun clattering useless beside him. The last turned and bolted, yelping like a kicked dog, disappearing into the trees. Silence crashed in, heavy and sudden. Julia stood slow, her hands shaking now, her breath ragged. She wasn't afraid, just alive, sharp and raw. "You all right?" Jed asked, lowering his rifle, his face streaked with sweat and dust. She nodded, wiping blood from her cheek. We're all breathing. That's enough. Sarah climbed out from hiding, wide-eyed but steady, pulling Liam with her. He clutched his horse, cheeks streaked with dirt, silent for once. They've buried the bodies at dawn, far from the shack at the edge of the land. No words, no prayers, just dirt and stones piled high. Julia walked the perimeter alone as the sun rose, its light spilling gold across the grass. She knelt, pressed her palm to the soil, and whispered, I forgive you, Sam. Not for him, for her, to let it go. When she returned, Jed was packing the wagon, his movements slow but sure. You ready? He asked, glancing up. She looked once more at the horizon, then back at the life waiting, the kids' laughter, the firelight, the steady rhythm of days ahead. Yes, she said, firm and final. The ride back was quiet, the kids asleep in the back, heads touching, the wagon creaking over ruts. Julia leaned into Jed, her head resting on his shoulder, the warmth of him grounding her. You think we can do this? He asked after a long stretch of silence, his voice soft. She smiled, small but real. We already are. 2 days later, they rolled up to the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone had kept watch, maybe a neighbor bartering kindness for salt. Julia ushered the kids inside, peeling off their coats, kissing their foreheads as she tucked them into their own beds. She stood in the doorway, watching the light shift across the wooden floor. So many days of fear, solitude, hunger for something more, and now this, solid and warm beneath her feet. Jed stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist, his breath warm against her hair. You thinking again? He asked, a tease in his tone. Always, she said, leaning into him. He kissed her temple, soft and quick. You're allowed to rest, you know. I know, she replied. But not yet. That night, they sat by the fire, the cabin glowing with a quiet peace. Liam mumbled in his sleep, a jumble of bandits and heroes. Sarah snored faintly, her sharp edges softened by dreams. The world beyond the windows had gone still. No wind, no howls, just a deep, patient quiet. Julia looked into the flames and spoke, soft as a prayer. They call me too old, Jed. Left me in the snow like I was nothing. He stirred the coals with a poker, the fire flaring briefly. Fools do that, he said. You proved them wrong. She nodded slow. I did, more than once. He set the poker aside, turned to her, his gray eyes steady. You saved us all, you know. Not just tonight, every damn day since he got here. She didn't answer, didn't need to. The fire cracked, the wood sighed, and outside, the stars wheeled slow and silent above the pines. Morning came with a sky like burnished silver, bird song threading through the trees like a promise. Julia stood on the porch, breathing deep, the air crisp and clean. Jed joined her, coffee steaming in his hand, his shoulder brushing hers. What now? He asked, voice low and warm. She smiled full and bright, the weight of years lifting just a little. Now, she said, we live. And they did, scarred, strong, together a family forged in snow and fire, rooted deep in a land that tried to break them and failed.